So the Buddha taught, and this is probably the most kind of elegant or simple way of describing it, that our suffering comes from forgetting who we are. That we live inside a kind of trance of an idea of a self, a somebody. And that's, the self sense shifts some, but there's some kind of continuing themes in it. And it's a smaller self that has to do with our roles and the way we think we appear to others and our deepest wants and fears and the way our body is. It's that self sense that we get identified with. And it's the undercurrents are really wanting, fearing. That's the most familiar core sense of the self, the earliest. And so all spiritual paths in some way are offering ways of paying attention and ways of living that help us to wake up from that identity, that confined identity, that landlocked sense. Okay? And the shift in identity, and we have it many moments, we just don't really get familiar with it. I mean, there are moments that where we feel this wonder at nature, that just this amazing mystery of how things are, just being outside, or moments where we feel a real sense of connection with others, or moments when we just get really quiet and we can sense a mystery that's lurking that we've kind of pulled away from. But the spiritual path is really a sense of tapping into that larger sense of being over and over again until that love, that consciousness, that openness, that wakefulness is more familiar of who we really are than any of the smaller selves we were living inside. I've been traveling for about 3 weeks. And I find that traveling shines a light on our somebody conditioning in a really interesting way, because we're out of our normal environments, the normal routines that trigger us. So in a way, we're not as much inside the familiar sense of who we are. Especially for me, I was in Italy, and very different environment. I wasn't in my normal roles. And so there was a sense of kind of an amorphousness of who I was anyway. But what's interesting about traveling, because the familiar identity can get much more porous, is that when you get triggered, it's very clear that you've come back into your somebodyhood. So I had a few examples. It's like the Gremlins, we're back, that one, remember? So there I was traveling, as I'm mentioning, and we went to a place called Sardinia. Some of you might have heard of it. It's an island off of Italy. Wonderful, beautiful place. And we were fortunate to have very good friends that hosted us who they speak English. They themselves aren't English, native language. But they arranged a picnic for us with their friends that are locals there, many generations back, Sardinians. They're all Italians. None of them spoke any English. So Jonathan and I were the only English-speaking people, and the only ones that really could communicate with us were our two friends. These folks are really eager to introduce us to their traditions. Everything at that picnic they grew or they made themselves. And so there we were in this beautiful spot high in the mountains where just shepherds over the centuries had used this place, a meadow and flowers and, kind of idyllic. And so I'm going to tell you different ways somebody sprung into action during this picnic. And at first somebody kind of coagulated because it became clear that they're telling some really funny jokes. Everybody was doubled over, but I had no idea what they were talking about. And people would say things to me and try to bring me out. And, I'm generally glad to talk, but, I didn't know a word of Italian. So I started getting into that sense of not just cluelessness, but something's wrong with me or feeling inadequate or incapable because I was the outsider. And so I saw that very familiar sense of not necessarily being an outsider, because I usually am with a lot in situations where I'm teaching or I'm comfortable, but that sense of not being good at something, not knowing how to do something, and just feeling incompetent, feeling kind of stupid. Got tight. So then, okay, this is somebody here. So I just felt that kind of somebodyhood, and I just breathed with it, and I was kind of kind and kind of let go some. And then we got playful. In Spanish, I know a little bit of Spanish, so we use Spanish as our in-between language. And through the time, it was amazing how much understanding could happen. So that's somebody, that incompetent somebody, still didn't know what I was doing, but it was fine. Then the hours started passing. Now, I'm an introvert, and I usually only do a little bit of social stuff, and I'm not one for too much hanging out. But this started going on and on and on, and I started realizing this would be a whole day. And and I also had in my mind I wanted to do a hike and go swimming. So my controller, the person has a map of time in her mind and has a control idea. We're doing this, but now we're doing this, and then we're doing that. That somebody came up. So I had to work with that somebody and let go and forgive her for being there and just go with the flow. But then time started disappearing and it got very fluid. Food was really lovely. They brought it out, the grilled veggies and the homemade ricotta and the homemade breads. And I really loved it. And then another course came out and I realized this was the first course of about 8 courses. And the homemade wine, they were drinking wine starting at 12:30, and I barely ever drink wine because it gives me a headache. But, when in Rome, so I was doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but I was getting really neurotic because, I don't eat certain things, and they all wanted me to eat everything. So my, kind of eating disordered neurotic self started shaping up. So then I had to be with that one. But I'm going to tell you about the last one because this one really kind of, the self became very tight. They presented the desserts, cakes and fruit and so on. And then they were very proud to have the final course. And the final course is called kasu marzu. And it's cheese. And the cheese has larvae in it, these little worms, like thousands and tens of thousands of little worms in it that make the texture of the cheese very soft. So I was supposed to eat this kasu marzu stuff with the little worms crawling in it. And I started I kind of sidled away from the table and, it was like, okay, when in Rome goes only so far. And, I'm not in Italy, I'm in Sardinia, but they were saying, Tara, come over. So this tightness, I just kept saying, okay, this one too. And there's this too. And I took my bite of this wormy cheese, and I have to say that it was every bit as disgusting. I mean, but there was this kind of inner freedom, like, okay, I can do this. Now, my point of the story, just so you know, is not that in order to experience nobodyhood, you have to eat cheese with worms in it, and but it's a fascinating thing to have a filter where you're just going to be curious as to how the self forms, and just in some way to go, okay, what's this somebody feel like? How is somebody experiencing this right now? And in the moments that you recognize that somebody has appeared, you're no longer identified that much. You can work with it. You can be humorous. You can be compassionate. And the truth is, again, we're not trying to get rid of the somebody, but when we're aware of the patterns, that makes room for a more natural intelligence and kindness and compassion and creativity to flow through. So again, I want to say we're not trying to get rid of the ego. We need kind of the egoic self to strategize and navigate and move us through and be the one who banters with other people or be the one in a role that is an authority in some situations and a student in others. We need the egoic self. But the egoic self, if we think that's who we are, is primarily going to be driven by fear and wanting. If we can remember the nobody, the wholeness of who we are. If we can remember that field of awakeness and tenderness and mystery that's really our source, then the somebodies that emerge through us will be filled with that light and that intelligence. I love the way Sri Nisargadatta puts it, because in a way that larger sense of being means that we're nothing. I mean, we're nobody. We're not identified with a somebody, but we're the whole, everything. And the way he puts it, and I think it's so beautiful, is wisdom tells me I'm nothing. Love tells me I'm everything. And between the two, my life flows.